Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. This is our Thursday Neoliberalism show. And tonight we're going to cover a few things. One is a symbol of a victory for the opponents, of neoliberalism, and a defeat for the neoliberals, specifically, in the nation, of Uruguay, where they've, in a vital area, almost entirely shifted to green power. We'll also discuss one of the failures, of liberalism, the problems the private equity companies are having in the healthcare area. And then we'll discuss what's going on with efforts to start, a labor party here in the United States. And the inability of people to do that, so that our two parties, of course, are generally anti-labor. And it seems that third parties that are about to emerge, at least in one case, will also not be a labor party. So the question is, where is the American Labor Party, and why don't we have one? And the last piece we deal with will be we're discussing the question of whether there's been a major defeat for the neocons, the foreign policy branch of the neoliberals. And I'll be discussing a column of Pepe Escobar's on what appears to be the Houthi victory in the Red Sea in support of the Palestinians. So I think this should make for a very interesting show, and I hope you'll stay for the whole of it. But let us start with the victory over neoliberalism in Uruguay. The piece we're going to deal with here, I picked up at Portside. It's originally from The Guardian. It's by Sam Meadows. The name of it is Uruguay's Green Green Power Revolution, rapid shift to win, shows the world how it's done. The tagline is, stung by the 2008 oil price spike, Uruguay now produces up to 98% of its electricity from renewables. That's amazing, isn't it? Can other countries follow suit? This was published on December 27th, 2023. And of course, it was yesterday. Here's a photo of a wind farm in Florida, Uruguay. That is, Uruguay has a Florida too. And that's a wind farm in that place. Up to 98% of the country's power comes from renewables. This is a photograph by Alessandro Cinque. It was the 2000s, and fossil fuel prices were rising worldwide. After a period of volatility in the 1980s, the crude oil price per barrel had reached one of its lowest points, $20 per barrel, at the end of 2001. But then, over the course of 6 years, it tripled before a new oil shock saw prices surpass those of the 1970s, reaching a record $145 a barrel on the 3rd of July 2008. Okay, so Uruguay imports its oil, so it had a problem. Demand for energy in the country had grown by 8.54% the previous year, and household energy bills were increasing at a similar rate. The 3.4 million strong population, yes, it's a very small country, was becoming restless, lacking alternatives. President Tabaré Vázquez was forced to buy energy from neighboring states at higher prices. Even though Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay had a mutual aid agreement in case of emergency conditions. To escape the track, Vasquez needed rapid solutions. He turned to an unlikely source, Ramon, okay, I guess it's Mendez Galen, a physicist who would transform the country's energy grid into one of the cleanest in the world. Today, the country has almost phased out fossil fuels in electricity production. Depending on the weather, anything between 90% and 95% of its power comes from renewables. In some years, that number has crept as high as 98%. Phasing out fossil fuels was a central issue at COP28. After a week of tense negotiations in Dubai, countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels within energy systems, but campaigners, governments, and environmental experts continued to debate how to make that transition. There's a photo of the physicist. That is Ramon Mendez Galan. I thought I could understand, a little bit about this problem. That's a quote from him. One answer could lie in what the nation of Uruguay has achieved within a decade and a half. Quote, I had been working abroad for 14 years, and when I came back, there was this energy crisis. But the only solution people were giving was to install a nuclear power plant. That was it, unquote. Galen remembers. Quote again, I was a nuclear physicist, so I thought I could understand a little about this problem. The more Galen researched the issue, the more he became convinced that nuclear power was not the answer for Uruguay. Instead, he argued it was renewables. He published his finding in a paper that laid out his belief that the country should go all in on wind power. Soon after, he received a phone call inviting him to become the energy secretary of Uruguay and to implement his plan. Quote, imagine my surprise, unquote, he says. Quote again, this was crazy, but I did something even more crazy. I accepted, unquote. Uruguay is a small country, about 26% smaller than the UK by area, wedged between two giants. Argentina's sprawling capital, of Buenos Aires, lies 31 miles, 50 kilometers, south of the mouth of the Rio Plata, which forms part of the border between the two countries, while the northern border of Uruguay is shared with Brazil, an even larger nation. In this context, the country is easily overlooked. However, economically, It is a South American success story. Its GDP per capita was 16,420. I'm not sure what that currency symbol is for. Okay, it looks like euro to me. So if that's true, it'd be 16,420 euros in 2022, according to the World Bank. The highest on the continent. Only a tiny fraction of its population lives in extreme poverty. The country has a burgeoning middle class, which accounts for about 60% of the population. There are high expectations for lifestyle and opportunities. Such demographic change has driven demand for the trappings of a contemporary 21st century lifestyle. Homes are fitted with washing machines and dishwashers. Air conditioning units have become commonplace. Has vast flat screen TVs and connected devices. Here's a picture, okay, of Montevideo City, capital, okay, of Uruguay. My memory tells me, I don't know if this is correct, that 2/3 of the population of the country, okay, is in Montevideo. So that's the city at night with a burgeoning middle class. There has been growing demand for goods powered by electricity. All of that requires power. Over the course of about a decade, the nation of Uruguay, under the stewardship of Galan, installed about 50 wind farms across the country, decarbonized the grid, and bolstered its hydropower. The biggest challenge, however, was to change, the narrative about renewables. Back then, sustainable energies were still surrounded by many misconceptions, says Galan. They were too expensive, too intermittent, or would raise unemployment. And changing these stories proved vital to getting buy-in from all levels of society. No one believed we could do it. We needed new solutions. We needed to do things differently, he says. Okay, today, even members of that cabinet say to me, when you were saying those things on TV in 2008, we were thinking, how are we going to explain this when we fail? Okay, so Galan says there needed to be a strong national narrative, quote unquote, to make it work. Quote, I told people this was the best option, even if they don't believe climate change exists. It's the cheapest and not dependent on crazy fluctuations in oil prices, unquote. And with that narrative, the government set about winning over a skeptical populace. One initial concern was that jobs would be lost in the energy sector. Instead, about 50,000 new jobs were created, a large number in a country with such a small population. Yes, that is a large number. Again, what was the population of Uruguay? It gives it up here. I missed it somehow. Let's see, is it above here? Thought the article said 3.4 million strong population. There it is. So that's about 1/110th of the population of the United States. So at 50,000 jobs, if I have the arithmetic right, doing it in my head, those 50,000 jobs are equivalent to 5 million new jobs here, which is quite, getting 5 million new jobs here would be very significant. Okay. The idea of a just transition in which nobody was left behind became central. And some workers were offered places on retraining schemes to adapt to the new normal. Workers were offered retraining schemes to adapt to the Green Revolution. Others were able to play the changes to their advantage. Okay. Santiago Ravello, age 52, owns a beef farm in the central part of Uruguay, about 175 miles north of the capital, Montevideo. Beef production is a primary industry across the country, owing to its vast swaths of grasslands. 2009, the Ravello family was debating whether to sell its farms. That was when Ravello met Fernando Sheikh, who ran what was previously a small energy efficiency consultancy and had learned about the country's transition to renewables. Sheikh had spotted an opportunity in the transition plan early on. His company had previously made its money by advising businesses on how they could cut their energy usage, but it moved into wind farm development. He said to Ravello that his family's farms could be a site for an onshore wind farm, and that building one need not affect his cattle. The pair prepared a bid for a contract and went to a developer, but lost. Quote, Fernando was gutted by this, unquote. Ravello says. Quote, he told me you can go with another company, but he had always been honest with me, so I told him. It's not all about the money, unquote. Today, the farm, specifically Ravello's farm, is home to 22 wind turbines, a side business that gives the family a healthy source of income. Uruguay's green transition has not been without its challenges. However, one was logistics. According to Gonzalo Casaravilla, who served as president of the state energy company UTE between 2010 and 2020, outside cities, roads are small, with few motorways. The parts of wind turbines are anything but small, and moving them into position is a difficult undertaking. This was achieved by means of rolling roadblocks and convoys to create a minimum of disruption when new wind farm projects were built. Quote, it was funny. In the beginning, the technical people in my company were saying, quote, whoa, be careful, unquote. A year and a half later, they said, quote, okay, it's a good idea, unquote, says the Casaravilla. Quote, there was friction at the beginning, but then it was the best team we could have had, unquote. There's a wind farm outside of Montevideo seen at dusk. The transition has not been universally popular. There are occasional grumbles from people who wonder why their energy bills have not fallen if renewable energy is, quote, free, unquote. This is a complaint that Bacalan shrugs off. Quote, people are wondering what happened and why their bill isn't lower, unquote, he says. But in that same time period, we had 40% of poverty. Now it's 10%, and extreme poverty has nearly disappeared. Quote, people now have air conditioning that they didn't have before, using more and more electricity. Um, um, Xavier Costantini, a partner at the consultancy McKinsey, based in Montevideo, says that the idea that renewable energy is free is a misconception. There are maintenance costs, although these are relatively modest, but crucially, the initial investment needs to be paid back. That wouldn't be the case if government could make the initial investment. Okay, then the payback would just be the availability of energy. That's what could be done here in the United States. The question of whether Uruguay's transition provides a vital blueprint for the world is not a simple one. Some characteristics gave the country an advantage. Costantini says it is blessed by nature with strong winds and considerable hydropower, which is sometimes sold to Brazil when in surplus. Excuse me. An alternative energy source, such as hydropower, is vital to plug gaps in a renewable grid, as wind and solar, are intermittent. So there is the admission that an alternative source of energy um, 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 is necessary. Fortunately, hydropower, is plentiful there. Unlike some countries in the region, Uruguay is very stable politically, which made investing for the long term much more palatable for foreign companies. So they were not free of neoliberal models. They had to have foreign companies come in to actually accomplish this. It also had relatively high tax rates on imports, a lever it was able to use to encourage the foreign investment in the transition. However, such conditions can be found elsewhere. In the UA, for example, Scotland has considerable hydropower potential. Quote, full decarbonization is expensive, but you could get to a high level of decarbonization, unquote, Costantini says. Quote, I'd say by the end of the next decade, there's certainly scope for a country such as the UK to have a highly decarbonized grid at a very cost competitive rate, unquote. For Uruguay, meanwhile, has moved on to what is becoming known as the second stage of its transition. It is gradually moving its buses and public vehicles over to electric and incentivizing taxi and minicab drivers to switch. How well this works could provide a global roadmap for how other countries can decarbonize their economies. Perhaps even the United States, I would hope. So there it is. I thought it was very interesting how that was done there. I don't think the model should be unique to Uruguay, even though the country is so small. There are many areas inside the United States that replicate those conditions. The availability of hydropower and the availability of wind power, very, very plentiful wind power. If a clean grid were created, it would be possible to transfer the surplus of wind and hydropower that exists in the West and the East Coasts to the remainder of the country. I don't see that as a major problem if we could invest in it. Of course, that if is a tall order. So, next one I want to take up is the problems that are occurring with hospitals that are owned by private equity. I'm being joined by Dee Pierce of Around the World with Dee, and friends. And I'm just going to let her in now.
Hello.
Hello, Dee. How are you doing tonight?
Alrighty, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I hope the end of your show was very climactic.
Yes,
It looked
I
like
tell you.
that final article had a really great climax to it. It was extremely well written.
Yes, it was.
Okay, I see
And
that. I see Andy Candy is here, and she says, "Hiya, Bonnie, Joe, and friends. Joe, what is it called when a state sends their state military to attack another state? In the United States." Uh, I mean, I'd say that's an internal rebellion of some sort. Why is Texas sending its military to attack another state in the United States, or is that happening somewhere else? Uh, Kay Ryan says hi all and tells us her net Kay is in and out again. And Dee says hello to everyone.
yeah, Kate's been going through a lot with that internet where she's at.
I know she has. It's really terrible internet. She was saying the other day she may move again,
Oh,
just because of the internet.
I hope they can get it straightened out that she doesn't have to go through moving again.
Yeah, I hope so too. So the article we're sharing now is about problems, of private equity or problems in hospitals owned by private equity firms. There is a sign. The sign says Peak Healthcare at Sligo Creek, 7525 Carroll Avenue. That is very local to where I am, relatively local to where I am. It's the entrance of a private equity owned healthcare facility pictured in Tacoma Park, in Maryland, probably about 40 miles away from here, on November 29th, 2020. In other words, that, is north of the Beltway, and I am west of the Beltway. Infections and falls more likely at private equity owned hospitals, according to a study. This article is by Jake Johnson, December 27th. Tagline is Patients at hospitals acquired by private equity firms saw a 25% increase, in adverse events. New research shows. A study published Tuesday in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that patients are more likely to fall or suffer infections in hospitals owned by private equity firms whose role in the United States healthcare systems has grown exponentially in recent years. Excuse me a second, I'm starting to get the hiccups here. The study uses Medicare claims data from between 2009 and 2019 to compare patient complications at private equity acquired hospitals and control facilities not owned by private equity. Dr. Sneha Kannan, a critical care physician and the study's lead author, said to the New York Times she was surprised by the extent of the difference between the two categories. Patients at private equity owned hospitals saw 25.4% increase in adverse events such as falls and dangerous central line bloodstream infections in the 3 years after the acquisition, according to the new study, even though the private equity hospitals analyzed in the paper tended to have younger and lower risk patients. Quote, surgical site infections doubled from 10.8 to 21.6 per 10,000 hospitalizations at private equity hospitals, despite an 8.1% reduction in surgical volume. Meanwhile, such infections decreased at control hospitals, unquote, the study shows. The results indicate that the quality of inpatient care is significantly worse at hospitals owned by private equity firms, which are notorious for bleeding companies dry for a quick profit at the expense of workers and local communities. Over the past decade, private equity companies have dramatically extended their reach in U.S. healthcare, purchasing physician practices, hospice care facilities, nursing homes, and hospitals. Okay, the new study in the journal, the American Medical Association, JAMA, offers the latest evidence of the private equity industry's increasingly harmful effects on the U.S. healthcare system, which already leaves tens of millions of people uninsured and vulnerable to medical and financial disaster. A report released earlier this year by the consumer advocacy group Public Citizen notes that private equity has targeted segments of the healthcare industry since at least the 1990s, with many predictable outcomes. Quote, okay, among them, shocking lapses in safety have occurred. Prices have risen faster than at non-private equity acquired entities, and patients have been subjected to price gouging schemes, unquote, the report states. And quote again, the conflict between providers' obligations to provide the best care and private equity investors' insatiable appetites for maximized profits is clear. There's a misprint in that article. It says provides rather than profits, but they obviously mean profits. The new peer-reviewed study was published last week. It was published just weeks after the Senate Budget Committee launched a bipartisan investigation into the negative impacts of private equity ownership on U.S. Hospitals. Quote, as private equities moved into healthcare, we have become increasingly concerned about the associated but negative outcomes for patients, unquote. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, chair of the budget panel, the successor to Bernie Sanders as the chair of the budget committee, said in a statement earlier this month, quote, from facility closures to compromised care, it's now a familiar story. Private equity buys out a hospital, saddles it with debt, and then reduces operating costs by cutting services and staff, all while investors are pocketing millions, unquote. The senator added, quote again, before the dust settles, the private equity firm sells and leaves town, leaving communities to pick up the pieces, unquote. That's the pattern of private equity. That's what it does. Private equity firms are examples of the purest form of neoliberalism. You maximize profits over people, and then you get the hell out of town. And that's really the point of that article. It's a perfect illustration of that sort of thing. At the start of this stream, I said that I would cover oh, okay. I said that I would cover the issue of the emergence of a Labor Party or the lack of emergence of a Labor Party here in the United States. I won't have time for that, okay, tonight. Okay, so, okay, I'm not going to do that. Okay, I left the link in the, it should be, okay, in the description to a Common Dreams article on that subject. But yeah, we won't have time to cover that here tonight. So the last article is in the foreign policy area. Okay, that is very important. So I'm going to jump, okay, right over to that. I note that Andy Candy says, I was just wondering how much more but New York can take from Texas, but you, okay, we're really close. Well, thank you, Andy. I thought that there was something going on with Texas because that's the kind of thing Texas, okay, would do. But really, it's not a state military, of course. It's just essentially busing people from Texas up to New York. Okay, I have a theory about that. And my theory is that they're sending people up to New York. And if those people are treated right in New York State, if New York State handles it well, then those people are going to enrich New York State because that's what people do. They enrich places, okay, that they go to. I'm showing my bias. I am for immigrants. My grandparents, okay, were immigrants to this country. And I know they enriched, okay, the United States and even New York City because they were there. They were, okay, in New York City itself. And when they came over, I don't know if I can say they didn't have a dime, but it was pretty close to that. So there we are. I think New York is lucky to get those immigrants, and I hope they get treated well. I think the final joke on that score is going to be on Texas, not, okay, on New York. But having said that, I'm going to go to my next piece, which is about the neocons in foreign policy, the foreign policy face, okay, of neoliberalism. The foreign policy face of neoliberalism, okay, is imperialism. And here we're talking about a big blow to imperialism and colonialism. How Yemen changed everything. This piece is by Pepe Escobar, one of the leading journalists, okay, of this world. The tagline is, in a single move, Yemen's Ansarallah has checkmated the West and its rules-based order. Now, I'm not quite sure it's checkmate quite yet, but it's beginning to look like it. I think it's really amazing that they could do the checkmate, and it not only speaks to their boldness and the way they've organized themselves, but it also speaks to the fundamental incompetence of military planners in the United States, okay, in Israel. But let's go on. Whether invented in northern India, eastern China, or Central Asia, from Persia to Turkestan, chess is an Asian game. In chess, there always comes a time when a simple pawn is able to upset the whole chessboard, usually via a move in the back rank whose effect simply cannot be calculated. Yes, a pawn can impose a seismic checkmate. That's where we are geopolitically right now. The cascading effects of a single move on the chessboard. Yemen's Ansarallah, stunning and carefully targeted blockade of the Red Sea, reach way beyond global shipping supply chains and the war of economic corridors, not to mention the reduction of the much lauded U.S. Navy force projection to irrelevancy. Yemen's resistance movement, Ansarallah, has made it very clear that any Israel affiliated or Israel destined vessel will be intercepted. While the West bristles at this and imagines itself a target, the rest of the world fully understands that all other shipping is free to pass. Russian tankers, as well as the Chinese, Iranian, and Global South ships, continue to move undisturbed across the Bab al Mandeb, narrowest point, 33 kilometers, okay, and the Red Sea.
Huh.
The hegemon is disturbed by this challenge to its rule based order. It is outraged that Western vessels delivering energy or goods to law breaking Israel can be impeded, that the supply chain has been severed and plunged into deep crisis. The pinpointed target is the Israeli economy, which is already bleeding heavily. A single Yemeni move proves to be more efficient than a torrent of imperial sanctions. It is the tantalizing possibility of this single move turning into a paradigm shift with no return that is adding to the hegemon's apoplexy, especially because imperial humiliation is deeply embedded in the paradigm shift. Russian President Vladimir Putin, on the record, is now sending an unmistakable message. Forget the Suez Canal. The way to go is the Northern Sea Route, which the Chinese, in the framework of the Russia-China Strategic Partnership, call the Arctic Silk Road. Ooh. Whoa. Map of Northeast and Northwest passage shipping routes. Very interesting map. The blue is Northwest Passage. The red is Northeast Passage. And the dotted lines are major passages right now. for the dumbfounded by Europeans, the Russians have detailed three options. First, sail 15,000 miles around the Cape of Good Hope. Second, use Russia's cheaper and faster Northern Sea route. Third, send the cargo via Russian railways. Rosatom, which oversees the Northern Sea route, has emphasized that non-ice class ships are now able to sail throughout the summer and autumn, and year-round navigation will soon be possible with the help of a fleet of nuclear icebreakers. All that I think is very interesting. All that is direct consequences of the single Yemeni move. I mean, who could see this possibility? Who could see this change possibility except for Pepe Escobar? I mean, this is incredible that he comes out with this.
Hmm.
I don't know anybody else who was thinking about this at all. All that as direct consequences of the single Yemeni move. What next? By Yemen entering BRICS Plus at the summit in Kazan, which of course is in Russia. Kazan is in Central Asia, but it's part of Russia. In late 2024, under the Russian presidency of BRICS, the new architecture will be framed in West Asia. The US-led Armada, put together for Operation Genocide Protection, which collapsed even before birth, may have been set up to, quote, warn Iran, unquote, apart from giving Ansarallah a scare, just as the Houthis, Tehran, is hardly intimidated because its West Asia analyst ace, Alistair Crook, succinctly put it, quote, Sykes-Picot is dead. For those who don't know, Sykes-Picot, okay, is the delineation, okay, of borders, okay, in West Asia. That was done, okay, by the British and French, okay, at the end, okay, of the First World War. That has caused so much trouble in Middle East conflict since that time. This is a quantum shift on the chessboard. It means West Asian powers will frame the new regional architecture from now on, not a U.S. Navy projection, quote, unquote. That carries, okay, an ineffable corollary. Okay, ineffable, huh? Mysterious, quasi-secret. Those 11 U.S. aircraft carrier task forces, for all practical purposes, are essentially worthless. Everyone across West Asia is well aware that Ansarallah's missiles are capable of hitting Saudi, okay, and Emirati oil fields and knocking them out of commission. Also, not to mention the Emirati gas fields as well. So it is little wonder that Riyadh, okay, and Abu Dhabi would never accept becoming part of a U.S.-led the maritime force to challenge, okay, the Yemeni resistance. Add to it the role of underwater drones, now in the possession of Russia, okay, and Iran. think of 50 of these aimed at a U.S. Aircraft carrier. It has no defense. While the Americans still have very advanced submarines, they cannot keep the Bab al Mandeb and Red Sea open to Western operators. Well, okay, I have to say it depends on how extreme the Americans want to get, and how resistant the rest of the world would be to such extremities. Because those advanced submarines could surface and would be able to deliver uh, very serious nuclear attacks on the Houthis. That doesn't seem to be in anyone's consideration, at this point. But depending upon how dangerous this whole situation gets, the people who are running foreign policy, in the United States, have not shown a great deal of subtlety, in their foreign policy moves. And they may well elect at some time in the future to use, a nuclear weapon, or more than one, in areas where they can easily deliver it, and where they have a big advantage, over everybody else. And that big advantage is in submarines. That's one advantage which the U.S. Still retains. I know the Houthis dug in deeply, in their the underground tunnels that have allowed them to survive the Saudi bombings using American bombs for all these years. But I wonder if they would be able to survive. If they would be able to survive a nuclear attack. I wonder what the effects of that will be. I wonder what the scenarios actually show. I cannot comment on that. I'm just now here speculating on what a possible countermove could be, as extreme and bloody that sort of move would be at this point. Going on the energy front, Moscow and Tehran don't even need to think, at least not yet, about using the nuclear option, quote unquote, or cutting off potentially at least 25% and up of the world oil supply. As one Persian Gulf analyst succinctly describes it, that would, quote, irretrievably implode the international financial system. A very good point, from Pepe. It would. For those still determined to support the genocide in Gaza, there have been warnings. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has mentioned it explicitly. Tehran has already called for a total oil and gas embargo against nations that support Israel. I have to stop right here also and interject following thought. You remember the first article we covered here tonight. In other words, how the Uruguayans have been very successful in shifting their electricity almost completely over to solar and wind power, supplemented by hydropower. That is something a lot of other nations in the world could do, as well, and that they should have been accelerating okay, a long time ago, so that they are no longer dependent on Middle East oil. And given what's been happening to the supply chains lately and to the threats, okay, to supply chains, it would be well advised for other nations that are dependent on oil from the Middle East, okay, right now, and oil from Russia, okay, as well, uh, to greatly accelerate their use, okay, of alternative energies. Uh, I know those developments have been very slow in Europe, compared to what is necessary. And that's why we see the current problem, okay, in European industry. It was struck a mortal blow when the United States exploded the pipeline from Russia, the Nord Stream pipeline. Uh, that wouldn't have been the case if Germany, which was a leading nation in developing solar and wind power, had done that far faster, okay, than it had done it. That might have actually required the Eurozone, okay, to begin acting as a nation rather than a sort of quasi coalition of a large number, okay, of nations. But okay, if the people of the Eurozone had allowed the European Central Bank to use its currency issuing powers for development, okay, inside of the Eurozone, and that had gone on for the last 20 years or so. Most of the electric power in Europe right now would be dependent on solar and wind and hydropower. And there would have been very little dependence on Russia for oil. Just saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those still determined to support the genocide in Gaza, there have been warnings. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has mentioned it explicitly. Tehran has already called for a total oil and gas embargo against nations that support Israel. For that matter, why the hell haven't the Israelis made it a priority to go solar and wind themselves? They certainly have to have a surfeit of solar and wind resources, okay, in that nation. And certainly the capability to do hydropower as well. I mean, why haven't they done that? Why have they maintained their own dependence on oil all these years and made themselves so vulnerable? It's an interesting question. A total naval blockade of Israel, meticulously engineered, remains a distinct possibility. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC commander, Hossein Salami, said Israel may, quote, soon face the closure of the Mediterranean Sea, the Strait of Gibraltar, okay, and of other waterways. Very interesting threat. Keep in mind, we're not yet even talking about a possible blockade of the Strait, okay, of Hormuz. We're still on Red Sea slash Bab al-Mandeb. Because if the Straussian neocons in the Beltway, okay, that Straussian reference is to the political thinker, the Platonist Leo Strauss, okay, of the University of Chicago, who was a teacher, okay, of many of the senior neocons, okay, in the Beltway. The Straussians are very interesting, okay, in their political theory, because they emphasize, okay, extremely heavily the Platonist idea, practicing uh, the the noble lie. Okay, the noble lie idea of Plato, okay, that rulers should be free to lie for good purposes, but the aristocrats, uh, the philosopher kings, which they think they are, can practice that. And of course, the neocons, okay, in the Beltway, are doing noble lies, okay, all the time. So they get really unhinged by the paradigm shift and act in desperation to, quote, teach, okay, a lesson, unquote, to Iran, a choke point, Hormuz, Bab al Mandab, Bakambo, the blockade, and they're teaching them a lesson, okay, by blockading the whole area, might skyrocket the price of oil to at least $500 a barrel, triggering the implosion of the $618 trillion derivatives market and crashing the entire international banking system. Yay, Pepe, foreseeing that possibility. The paper tiger is in a jam. Mao Zedong was right after all. The U.S. may in fact be a paper tiger. Putin, though, is way more careful, cold, and calculating. Oh, yeah, he is. What has struck me now for years has been the contrast in the relative mental powers or intellects of Putin compared to the American president. There hasn't been an American president for a very long time who's a match for this guy. That brings us to the prime working. I'm sorry, I skipped a sentence. With this Russian president, it's all about an asymmetric response, exactly when no one is expecting it. That brings us to the prime working hypothesis, perhaps capable of explaining the shadow play, masking the single Ansarala move, okay, on the chessboard. When Pulitzer winning investigative journalist Cy Seymour Hersh proved how Team Biden blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, there was no Russian response to what was, in effect, an act of terrorism against Gazprom, against Germany, against the EU, and against a bunch of European companies. Yet, Yemen now, with a simple blockade, turns global shipping upside down.
Mhm.
So, what is more vulnerable? The physical networks of global energy supply, Pipelineistan, okay, or the thalassocracy states that derive their power from naval supremacy. Russia privileges Pipelinistan. See, for instance, the Nord Stream pipelines and power of Siberia 1 and 2. But the U.S., the hegemon, always relied on its thalassocratic power, heir to quote, um, 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 Britannia rules of the waves, unquote. Well, not anymore. And surprisingly, getting there did not even entail the nuclear option, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which Washington games and scaremongers like crazy. Of course, we won't have a smoking gun, but it's a fascinating proposition that the single Yemeni move may have been coordinated at the highest level between the three BRICS members, Russia, China, and Iran, the Neocon new, quote, axis of evil, unquote,
Mhm.
plus other two BRICS plus energy powerhouses, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, as in, quote, if you do it, we've got your back, unquote. None of that, of course, detracts from Yemeni purity. Their defense of Palestine is a sacred duty. Western imperialism and then turbo capitalism have always been obsessed with gobbling up Yemen, a process that Issa Bloomy, in his splendid book Destroying Yemen, described as, quote, necessarily stripping Yemenis of their historic role as the economic, cultural, spiritual, and political engine for much of the Indian Ocean world, unquote. But Yemen, though, is unconquerable and true to a local proverb, quote, but deadly, unquote. Yemen Fataka. I'm not sure what Fataka means, but it sounds great. As part of the axis of resistance, Yemen's Ansarallah is now a key actor in a complex Eurasia-wide drama that redefines heartland connectivity. And alongside China's Belt and Road Initiative, the India-Iran-Russia-led International North-South Transportation Corridor and Russia's new Northern Sea Route also includes control over strategic choke points around the Mediterranean seas and the Arabian Peninsula. This is another trade connectivity paradigm entirely, smashing to bits Western colonial and neo-colonial control of Afro-Asia. So yes, BRICS Plus supports Yemen, who with a single move has presented Pax Americana with the mother of all geopolitical jams. Now, is that a great piece or what?
Yes.
I mean, that is a piece of fantastic imagination and global scope and subtle inferences of all kind you could study and study again and restudy again and think about this piece and its implications for days. It is a fantastic piece about how the neocons are being defeated and how the changes we are seeing before our eyes are leading to a multipolar world in which the world island is no longer dominated by sea power, the world island will be influenced and controlled by nations that are central to the world island. And we have to remember, okay, the Mackinder maxim: he who controls the world island controls the world. And so, D, any comments?
Yes, what I thought about when you were reading this, I was thinking about some of the videos and clips that I've watched from Shahid Bolson. He's Middle Nation, and he speaks from, West Asia. And he had been speaking for a while now when people were talking about why isn't the world, the Arab nations acting differently. This goes back in the beginning. Why weren't they just being forceful and everything else? And his thought process was the disrupting the money, disrupting like and he talked about the people that control the money changers, pretty much on top, and who they want to invest with is how things usually go. But he was talking about disrupting things economically instead of having them come and having your nations bombed. Who wants their countries bombed? They've been through that enough. You don't want to be killing your people and destroying your land. And the better option that he had said, some that he had heard some of the people, like I guess the higher ups, with Saudi Arabia and the different countries, because this man was a reporter, um, talking about that, the economic avenues, and he had mentioned that MBS had been flying all over, talking to all different people over and over and over again. But the big issue was you wanted to affect things economically as opposed to bombing the hell out of people. So I
Yes,
thought about him. I thought about him, when you were reading this article, what he had been saying.
yes, I think it was good to think about him.
Yeah.
Because he seems very relevant,
Yes.
okay, to this whole discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that article really deserves more and more attention
Mm-hmm.
and thought. It was a brilliant piece by Pepe. I've seen some other brilliant pieces by him, but I think this must be the most brilliant one I've seen
Mm-hmm.
so far. Andy Candy says, I really hope those migrants to New York prosper and get federal funding. Me too. Andy Candy says, hi, Yemen checkmated the Warhawks. Well, I don't know if they've quite um, done that yet. As I said earlier, I think it depends on how extreme the neocons want to get and how far Joe Biden, okay, is willing to go.
And they already know that Saudi Arabia is with Yemen. They're not with the U.S. on all of this.
Well, they're with Yemen. Uh, yeah, they're with Yemen, but there's cross conflicts there.
Oh, there's always cross stuff, but they said when it comes to this issue, they said,
Yeah,
they're not
yeah.
going along with the
With respect
UAE
to
and all
this,
those others.
yeah, with respect to this specific issue, they're with Yemen, but I don't think they like that Yemen has the power to destroy, okay, their oil fields.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why they were fighting the war with Yemen, okay, in the first place. Okay, they wanted to replace, okay, the Houthis and get a regime there that wasn't going to threaten uh, their oil fields because the
Right.
monarchy there feels very, very vulnerable, when it comes to Yemen. Now they're in agreement with them when it comes to Palestine. Okay, sure, but at one level, they wouldn't mind, okay, at all if someone could, simply eliminate the power, okay, of Yemen to destroy those oil fields. Uh, The Saudi princes are not really very religious.
No, they're not. From what I understand, MBS's mother is Jewish.
MBS is, I never heard that.
Oh, I've heard that several times.
Well, I'd be very interested to read some of those particular sources. Wow.
But
I
I
mean,
was shocked.
yeah, that's something else entirely. Oh, well. So, Kay says, glad to see you, G. D. And Andy Candy says, Joe, where does the material to make wind turbines come from? I think the material to make wind turbines comes from many different places. I think a lot of the material comes from Canada, but there also may be key things uh, that come from other areas of the world, rich in resources. Of course, both the United States and Canada are very rich in resources, but also South America, uh, is, and Mexico, very rich in resources also. Um, I'm pretty sure materials to make wind turbines uh, can all be sourced here, in the Western Hemisphere. I don't think they have to be sourced from Asia, or Africa. And I think it would be wise for our planners to set up supply chains, in this hemisphere, and supply chains as close to home as possible. And that's, I think, advice that all nations ought to take. If they can source the material right there, then the most vital thing they have to supply, other than food, which is energy, can be sourced domestically from their nations. Sooner the whole planet gets off oil, I believe the less wars there will be. Andy says, my internet went out too. Missed when you started talking about uh, um, Putin. Had to restart. Yet, um, Pablo is deep. Well, it's actually Pepe. Pepe Escobar.
Okay, here. I was looking that up because they're saying he was raised, because they always say he was raised by a Jewish mother, but now I'm looking at this and it's saying he was raised by a Jewish maiden. And so, and then I see in the background that there's some in the family, there's Judaism. So we'd have to really look into that more.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I didn't think they had any Jews left in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it says MBS says I was raised by a Jewish woman.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
I know.
So Andy Kinney says, I read Saudi Arabia is going green themselves. Yes. Yes, they are. The Saudi monarchs have been very interested in green energy for a long time. They know that the oil is not a renewable resource, and they know for their own security, uh, they're going to have to go green. They also know that they have huge resources for going green. Solar resources, wind resources. Obviously, they have ocean resources, also for hydropower. They're perfectly situated to get all of their energy from green sources. And they probably should do that long before the oil runs out. Anyway, So I think that's all for tonight. Have you anything else to add, Dee?
No, I thought that was very good that you presented that information, especially, because it is a powerhouse with Yemen. And just that whole trade, that whole route there, the blockade, blocking the ships from,
Yeah, I
getting
think
into
I
Israel.
think what the powerhouse is the whole combination of the BRICS, okay, with them,
Hmm.
the capability of the BRICS nations to defend them. Uh, that's really very, very significant. What we have to consider, from a geopolitical point of view, is how far the Russians and Chinese would extend themselves to protect uh, the Iranians, okay, and the Houthis
Hmm.
from possible serious attacks from the hegemon, to use that particular terminology, because the hegemon is trying like hell to hold on to the hegemony, and it can't have that if it allows the Houthis to get away with this. It's really a big threat, okay, to the hegemon. Okay, another big threat, but there are more and more big threats, okay, to the hegemon. I think it's time for the hegemon to give up on being the hegemon.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's time to start to play CYA, also known as cover your ass.
Right, and it's just so powerful right now with Yemen saying that, just ceasefire, that Palestinians, lead a normal life, cut the BS where Palestine is concerned.
Yes. So Andy Candy says, okay, another banger tonight. Kitty's sleeping good tonight, so I'm ecstatic that I caught you. And I'm ecstatic that you were here, Andy, and you were able to catch us. Where was Steve Wolfbrand tonight? It seems to me he would have liked this one.
I think so. Mm.
Okay, I think he's a little angry at me for what he considers to be Trump derangement syndrome. He thinks that I'm a victim of Trump derangement syndrome. I'll bet.
He wasn't on my show tonight either. I'm saying he wasn't in the audience, so he must be busy with something.
Yes, that's true. He might have been busy with something. Yeah, maybe Sabby Sabs had a big show tonight.
Hmm.
Andy says, less hegemon, more Pokemon. Laugh out loud. Night, night, lovelies.
Good night, Andy.
Good night, Andy. Okay, Dee, good night. Okay, to you. Um,
Yes.
I
Uh,
should announce I won't be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow is the anniversary, the 58th anniversary of my meeting Bonnie. And we are going out to celebrate. Yeah. And even though we will be home by the time of um, the show, I think we're just going to reserve the whole day for celebration.
oh, good.
I will be back on Saturday night to make up for the Friday night show.
Okay.
Uh, so I'll be doing Saturday night, okay, at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
But the 9 o'clock show tomorrow night will be vacant.
Oh, okay. So I could put my show on at 9.
You can put your show on, okay, at 9, but okay, I don't think I'll be there with you because we'll be celebrating.
Celebration.
Yeah, celebration. Okay, so good night, all. And good night
And
to you.
wait, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share, share, share. Share the show out.
And please buy us some coffees. Okay. And please visit my Patreon account from time to time. That would be very nice. And
Good
remember,
night.
Dee has a Cash App.
Yeah, Dolores Pierce.
Okay. That is to say, $. Okay.
Yeah.
Dolores Pierce.
Yes.
So thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you very much. And good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And,
And
and
good night.
enjoy your day tomorrow. I'm
Yeah,
sure you will. Celebrate.
Yeah.
Celebration.
We will.
okay. Thank you, Dee.
Uh,
And
good night.
Put myself in it so I can end it.